Thank you for joining the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast with your host, Clayton Craddock.
Welcome to the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast. My name is Clayton Craddock, and this is your one-stop shop for everything you'll need to know about playing drums for Broadway musicals. This is part 2 of my interview with Matt Vander Ende, the drummer for Broadway's Wicked. We start out this episode talking about his experience going out with the first national tour of Wicked. No need for further introduction. Let's just get right back into the conversation.
Wicked was just beginning to explode at this point. So Wicked had opened in 2003. Tour opened in February of 2005 in Toronto. The producers, for whatever reason, weren't totally sure how the show was going to do. So the idea was that it was open-ended. The vibe was that the show's a huge hit, so it's probably going to keep touring for years to come. But they weren't sure because we'd only sold tickets through to Toronto starting in February. But by the time the 2-month run in Toronto was over, the entire calendar year was sold out. Yeah, the entire year was sold out. So it was actually so sold out. The demand was so high that by the time we got into Chicago, they wanted to set up a brand new company to sit down in Los Angeles. So they were going to take the sets from the first national tour, leave them in Los Angeles, rebuild an entire tour, and then reopen the tour starting in San Francisco after the first 2-month Los Angeles run.
Wow.
Yeah, it was
about Wicked that I didn't really understand. I got to tell you, I told this to somebody else. I've never seen the show. Never heard the music until like 2 days ago. My girlfriend's like, "Oh my God, you got to hear this song." And she played it. She started crying. She's like, "Oh my God, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." And this is when she goes up and I was like, okay, I get it. I got to see it. And, you know, I've been trying to actually watch you in the pit, but every time I do that, I'm like, I have to either get a gig or something else goes on. I can never watch you play it. And I've always heard.
I know it's been funny like that. Like you call me and I remember through our connection through Memphis, and I was like, this guy would be perfect for this show because he's got a metal background. He's already played on a hard hitting rock show. So, and he's got the Broadway experience. He'd be perfect. I'm like, yeah, come in. Let's have you come watch the book and I'll make some space for you or we'll figure it out, have you check it out. And then next thing you know, you're like, oh, I got this gig.
Yeah. Like, and then
of course you do.
Which maybe I should just keep calling. He's like, hey man, can I come watch? So anyway, the thing is, I keep hearing how difficult Wicked is to play. And you did it in a week. I've heard so many stories like, oh my God, this is the most difficult show I've ever done in my entire life. Why is it so difficult? And why do you think it's so difficult?
The show itself is difficult. It's a kind of a nonstop, start to finish, high intensity show. It crosses over in genres of music for a drummer to be able to put on several different hats throughout the show all the time. So you quite literally go from a Stuart Copeland feel to a full-on 80s rock and roll ballad feel to a very aggressive, loud, like borderline punk feel to being a classical musician and being a typical, 2-beat Broadway musician. And this is happening throughout the show all the time. And the hard part is it's a very large orchestra by Broadway standards. It's 23 of us. And with a band that large, with the separation that we had in the pit, it was hard to play that show and drive it. Wayne Cilento is the choreographer, and he's very used to the older school style of like a chorus line style of drumming. And that's kind of the approach that you have. The drummer is the transmission of that show. Why I felt like it came to me easily is that there's one tune in the middle of that show where you quite literally, Gary's explanation of the description of this tune is perfect. It's like Bartok meets Metallica. You are like a Metallica metal drummer in the middle of a symphony orchestra, and there are time changes, there's retards, there's accelerandos, and on top of this, it's the big moment when the lead of the show is casting her spells. This is, a tune called No Good Deed. And it is just a brutal drum part. It's something that most drummers do not know and or get or would understand. And me being a metal and a rock and roll drummer and a classical drummer, it came to me like that. I was like, oh, I get this.
One question haunts and hurts. Too much to mention. Was I really seeking good or just seeking attention? Is that all good deeds are when looked at with an ice cold eye? If that's all good deeds are, maybe that's the reason why. No good deed goes unpunished. All helpful urges should be circumvented. No good deed goes unpunished. Sure, I meant well, look at what well meant did. Alright, enough, so be it then. Let all laws be agreed.
I mean, it just happened to happen. And I feel like, and I've been told this a couple times, Stephen Remus had told me this, Michael Keller had told me this, and Gary had told me this, that I was the perfect fit to take over that book just because of my background and my specific what I do. I know that I'm not the best fit for all Broadway shows. I'm not even close. Like, I can't do what Andreas does. There's just no way. And so I wouldn't work out in the Heights, and Alex Lacamoire was our music director at Wicked when I was taking over. And he was also the piano player, like right before that. When I subbed there, he was the piano player. And so there's that kind of level of intensity that was in the pit all the time. And he was very instrumental in getting that book and that feel of how that show should happen together. And Wicked feels like it's the kitchen sink being thrown at you all the time. And because it's a show that's organic and it moves and it's got a lot of motion, it's not the same show every single night. You can listen to 2 recordings a year apart and it sounds remarkably similar. But when you're inside the show, inside your head, it's different all the time. It's different with what's going on. It's different with what the music director is doing. And that particular show, the music director, that chair isn't as specific as like a symphony orchestra, right? That music director is directing everything that's going on stage and is keeping the orchestra together. And most of that pressure falls on the drum book. So when you're keeping the time together and they're worried about cues, they've got cues and stage cues, and they're conducting the orchestra at the same time, they don't have time to worry about if the drummer's got his shit together. So I think that kind of pressure makes that book and that show particularly hard. It is not an easy thing to do. I've had a lot of drummers come in and watch and play. Some drummers, it fits well with them. And some drummers, they think they can do it. I've had a couple of crash and burns, nothing really bad, but a couple early on where I'd learned I need to vet my subs more often. And sometimes it's an undue amount of pressure that could be on somebody. So I feel like if they don't have a significant amount of Broadway pressure, I don't want to put them through that. Do you know what I mean? Because it's a particularly large show.
How did you actually get the show? You were working with Gary.
The Broadway company?
Yes. You did the tour for a year. Then what happened?
I was on tour and Gary was going to leave to go do Tarzan. He was going to work with Phil Collins and originate the book for Tarzan. So he had put in his notice at Wicked, but he was still, I think, doing about a year. I'm sorry. He was still doing about a month left. And they had decided to choose his replacement out of the subs that were already on the Broadway book. I threw my hat in the ring. I knew that Bob Billig, who was our music director on the Wicked tour the first year I went out, was going to leave the tour and take over on Broadway. Did that have some influence on it? It might have. There are a lot of music directors that take drummers show to show to show to show. So it probably would have made him a lot more comfortable knowing that I was going to go with him. But he also knew that Alex and Stephen Remus were choosing a drummer to replace Gary based upon the subs that were in New York. And they're all really fine drummers. I think they just weren't finding the right fit to take over the chair. It's one thing to sub. It's another thing to actually own the chair. Your personality is kind of a big part of that as well. And how you interact with the orchestra and so forth. And I had had a whole year's experience on the road. I'd opened up the first national tour, so I was well used to the kind of pressure that was coming to that particular player on that book. And I think Bob going over to New York might have been an influence. I'm not totally sure. But at one point, we were playing down at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., and Aremus had come down to watch me play. I didn't really know this, but I was told later that he came down because he was like, we're not quite finding who we want, but I'm going to go check out the first national drummer, because he didn't know me. By the time I had subbed there, he was only conducting a few more times. This is like right around the time when Kristen and Adina were still in the show, but they were leaving, and he was already on to doing different stuff. So Alex's, other music directors had heard me play, but not so much Aremus. And Aremus didn't come out to set up the show on the road. He had left that up to Bob, who was the music director, and Michael Keller was around a lot. So there were some influences like, Keller and Gary and Bob saying, come listen to Matt, come check him out. You might find your fit there. And apparently he did come listen to me. And apparently I believe that's when they made their decision, is that when he saw me play at the Kennedy Center there. Did I say Lincoln Center or Kennedy Center? Whatever it was. Yeah, thank you. When he'd seen me play there, which is a similar size theater to that at the Gershwin, I think he was like, okay, that's our guy. And it was shortly after that that Keller had called me and said that Aremus wants you to come take over the book. And I was like, wow. It felt a little bit like it was coming out of the blue, because I really didn't have any idea that they were seriously considering me. I think it happened pretty quickly. I'm not completely sure how it happened, but I know that that's some sort of chain of events in that what have you. And I think it was the performances there at the Kennedy Center that it kind of sealed the deal, so to speak.
So you got the job as the drummer for the hit Broadway musical Wicked.
Right.
How did you feel after that? Did you like, oh my God, I got to the top of my profession? Like, what was going through your mind, and when did everything kind of start to settle in after that?
Yeah, that is how I felt about my Broadway career, that like, okay, this is the pinnacle. I'm not going to get a better drum book or a better show than this. I mean, I really felt that. I really loved the show. I felt like this is one of the few Broadway shows that I was really excited about playing every single night. All Broadway shows are fun. This one in particular was like something I totally fell in love with. And taking out the first national tour, I never got bored a single night. I mean, I was never even tired going in. I loved playing that book. So taking over on Broadway, it was hard replacing Gary on a couple different levels. On a personality level, he was the in-house contractor and a very charismatic guy, and the band really loved him. So it was hard replacing him on that level, because I'm the outsider guy who a lot of them don't remember when I subbed there, because it was a year ago. And a lot of them had never really met me because I'd only moved into the city 2 years ago, or 2.5 years before, or whatever it was. And there's a little bit of hazing and like, who is this guy? Because, they all had their friends that they wanted to get the job, and none of them got the job. They gave it to the outsider. And an outsider from California on top of that. I guess the sense was, well, it's the same show. It should feel the same, but it doesn't. It was quite literally like taking the transmission out of a car and putting in a new one, and grinding the gears a bunch of times, trying to get used to it. My sense of feel, my sense of time, my sense of how I put things and where I move the band or don't move the band was entirely different than Gary. I mean, they felt that I was the closest to representing him on that book. So they liked my energy level, and I'm an easy person to get along with. So that part of it worked out for me pretty quickly, but getting to like where my feel was and getting the band used to how I play the show, even though it was the same notes, was enough to rub a bunch of people the wrong way for a little while. And it takes time to break in. And I had to learn how to diplomatically be a person that is going to make them feel that I was the right choice, but then give them enough conviction in my playing that I am their right choice. And that even though this may not feel right now, totally, you're going to get used to it and appreciate it. I mean, there's a certain level of conviction you have to dig in. And I had to learn that within the first couple of months, because I was a little overwhelmed at first. I didn't quite know how to take where this was all coming from. And I remember speaking to, I spoke to Dave Radicek about it. I spoke to Larry Lilly about it. And who else did I speak to? I might have spoke to Gary a little bit about it too, just about, how do you approach this and make this work and, deliver yourself as a person and quite literally convince them that this is the best choice that they possibly could have made. With some people, it's like, oh yeah, he's perfect. But other people, it could be a little bit wonky at first. And because I knew the show so intimately from being on the road with it for a year, it was like taking a square peg and putting it into another round hole. And so shaving off all those edges to get it all to fit and to work out. Once it did work out, then I was getting compliments from like the lead trumpet, different heads of the orchestra saying like, your playing's really great and we're really glad to have you here. And it was a little bit rocky at first, but now it's like as good as we ever could possibly have imagined it. They were very nice compliments, but it takes a minute when you replace the drummer. I can't explain it any other than just like putting in a whole new transmission and engine into a car, and it's just going to perform differently. Whether it's better or worse, it's just different. You know what I mean?
Did you keep all the subs that were there before?
I did at first, yeah. I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I kept all of the subs, and then not too many of them have changed over the years. Some have gone and come back and so forth. But I've brought in a couple of others that were on my own. But the ones that I inherited were like Keith Krupe, Bill Lanham, Eric Poland. I think there's a couple others, but they've left, and I can't remember who they were. But any rate, yeah.
Wow, and that was 2006?
That was 2006 when I took over, yeah.
And you've been doing it ever since.
Yes.
Now, do you ever, I asked this to Bill Lanham, do you ever get bored or like, man, I can't believe I've been doing this for 15 years? I don't feel like, well, you don't really feel like not doing it anymore, I guess, but yeah. How do you keep things fresh?
Oh, that's a good question. I've had shows where I'm really tired, and for whatever reason, what's going on around my life has made it exhausting for me that day. And I go in to play the show and I'm not inspired or something. Some shows I have sat down and just turned everything off and tried to fall in love with the drums all over again. And then from the top of the show, really focus and enjoy every single hit that I play to the drums. Enjoy the sound of that tom, enjoy the sound of the kick drum, enjoy the sound of your cymbals. And it could help take my mind off of playing the same repetitive thing over and over and over again. It could help separate, like, I love listening to this that night, I love listening to this that night. And that's just like Band-Aid stuff. Really, to keep it fresh, I try to practice different styles and change it up in my practice room, or do some other gigs to do something different and fresh so that it takes me away from it, so that when I come back to the show, it feels really good, And the percussionist Andy Jones had told me one time, if you ever feel stale about the show, go out into the breezeway where the Gershwin is and sit there for a few minutes, right around half an hour, as people are starting to pile into the theater. You see this young girls and young guys or teenagers going on first date, or, older couples or what have you, theater goers, and they're enjoying it and they're excited to see the show. Little girls dressed up in a witch outfit or what have you. And it does definitely, like, wow, people really love the show. They're experiencing something for the first time in their lives. And, that's part of my job, is to deliver a great experience to them. And the show and everything around it is so much bigger than what I feel about it that night musically. I feel like that I earned my place there, but that I'm also really lucky and really blessed to even be there and playing, making a living as a musician. It seems seems so crazy sometimes, and with everything that's going on at the end of each night, I don't remember too many performances where I wasn't happy. I was always pretty happy. I never disliked being there. There were times where I was tired. There were times where I was sick. And there were times where I was dealing with some vertigo, probably about a year before the pandemic hit. And I was really more worried about anything else. I went through tendonitis on the show. I went through a hip problem on the show, a couple knee problems, and the hand tendonitis problems. But I ended up working through them. And it just helped shape me more as a player and really kind of appreciate the music and playing drums and being a musician, and like how fortunate I feel like that I could do this for an actual living,
Interesting. You have a lot of what the injuries come from playing the show, and have you figured out a way around getting more injuries?
Yeah, the first ones were, well, when I got into the show, there's a very finite amount of space, and Gary's a smaller person than me. Like, I have a longer reach than him, and my legs are longer, so the kit felt really tight. And I tried moving it out as much as I could, but there are those baffling walls that could not move, because on the other side of these walls were other musicians. So I was in a cockeyed position, and at first I guess it thought it wasn't going to be a big deal. But then once I started having an injury problem, I started seeing a doctor about kinesiology and trying to, redistribute a flow of blood into my tendons, because that's, my muscles were really tight. And so I had to go back. I took a couple lessons on the molar technique from Danny Gottlieb, and because he was a big student of, what's his name out in Jersey, the famous one. Anyway, he had helped me with my grip, and I tried approaching things a little bit differently. And I was really focusing on my posture and focusing on how I was playing the drums. And I also realized that hitting the drums the same way every single night was part of the problem. So I started mixing it up. Like I'd lead a fill with my left hand one night, or I'd lead a fill with my right hand another night. It really forced me to think hard, and it forced my muscles to play different things, because I wasn't doing enough outside work where I was playing and doing different stuff, that the repetitive stress of the same thing over and over again was part of what was contributing to the injury that I was getting. And the stress overall was a big part of it. So like lowering my stress and changing my diet to more of an anti-inflammatory diet was just a bit of it, but really working on my grip and relaxing and just changing it up and doing different stuff. And then seeing this doctor that would help with like kind of some blood flow or what have you. It took, I think 6 or 8 months of like this up and down kind of process, like good nights and bad nights, before I was able to get over it. And the doctor that I went to helped, because I was overwhelmed. I was like, is my career over? And he had helped me believe in myself that we're going to work through this. You're going to continue to work through this and continue to play. You're going to have nights where you're in a lot of pain. You're going to have nights where you're going to feel good about it. And I was doing a lot of icing at the end of the show, this like ice therapy and stuff. All of it helped, but the biggest part of it was just trying to become a drummer again and do different stuff. And like, part of it was like playing a fill a little differently every night. Sometimes I blow it a little bit. People give me a bad look, and I'm just like, yeah, this is part of my therapy, dude. You have no idea.
It's funny.
Yeah.
So did you, doing something different? Did you go back into your like woodshed and then listen to some prong? Or play some different music? I remember. I got to tell you a story about that time period when I graduated from college, and I was working at record stores, and it was like the late '80s, early '90s, and I remember listening to a lot of heavy stuff. And then one of the guys who we used to work at the record store made me a tape called "Soothing Tunes of Doom."
Oh, wow.
And I still have it to this day. It had like, Exodus, Prong. I can't remember some of the other bands. I should just look at the list, but it had all kinds of, and Soundgarden. And I just remember going to see Soundgarden in 1989 and just loving the long hair and and
Yeah.
the different thing, the different vibe about them. Plus, they were a groove oriented band. By the way,
Yeah.
after Soundgarden and Nirvana came out, you were still in Defiance. Did you see
Right.
a change in the music back then? You were like, oh my God, this is what we should do? Or do you like, man, screw these guys. We need to just keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
Sorry for going from Wicked back to Defiance, but that's...
Yeah, it's interesting. It's funny. It's funny you bring this up. I was going to mention it earlier, but then I kind of skipped over it. When we were on tour, we played up in Seattle and we saw the writing on the wall. That scene was exploding to a point where everybody was already talking about it. Our lead singer was buying Alice in Chains records and Soundgarden, and Nevermind had just come out. And I was like, oh boy. I mean, like, record sales in our genre of music fell off a cliff. And quite literally, the record industry ran up there to start signing all these bands. And I liked them. We weren't going to change our style of music to go do that, because that would have been clearly a sellout just to try to sell records. But our days were numbered, if you know what I mean. I mean, by the time Defiance was going to go do a fourth record, the Seattle scene and those bands exploded so much that our record label didn't pick up the next option. So we were without a label, and I was like, oh, well, this is probably the end. But we were not going to try to become the next Nirvana or the next Soundgarden, but we all loved those bands. We all loved that sound. We had splintered off into different bands that did stuff similar to that, but Defiance in itself didn't pursue going in that direction. I mean, I'm getting back together with my thrash metal band to go play a festival in Milwaukee in October. So yeah, I don't like actively listen to that stuff anymore. It's still really challenging to play. When I sit down and practice and want to play along to a record, Steely Dan's Asia, I try to wish that I could play like those guys, but I try to do stuff like that. And there's a friend of mine had sent me a really cool Jeff Porcaro book of like all his best tracks. And I pulled them up on YouTube and I read along with the music, and I try to play like Jeff Porcaro, which I'll never achieve. But meaning that some of those records where it's just about feel and the musical choices in the band, that's what I listen to and play along to. The metal stuff, no, I don't play along to that stuff anymore. When the band was deciding to get back together to do this festival, our lead singer went on to form a band called Skin Lab that's done pretty well. And, I told him, I said, I can't play like the metal guys these days. They play this incredibly intricate, fast double kick stuff and blast beats that I know it's so insane. And I'm like, I just don't play like that. So I'll come back and play with Defiance, but I'm going to play Defiance the way I played Defiance, the way I recorded those records. I'm not going to be this, new aged metal drummer. I'm still going to be me. And they were, of course, like, yeah, of course, that's what we're doing. It's this resurgence of the Bay Area metal band. So that's what we want. And I was like, okay. And as I was relearning the tunes, I was like, wow, it's like getting ready to run a marathon.
Can you still play what you played back in 1992?
I can. 89? There's a couple. Yeah, right. 89, 90. Yeah. There's a couple of songs. Luckily, we're not playing them. That I can't play. Like, I was listening to it and I was like, I have no idea what I was doing. There's some kind of double kick thing going on with the tom thing. And I was like, I think I'm just glad I'm not doing this tune. And then the other day, the singer was like, let's play this tune. It's called Steamroller. I had learned this technique from one of the fusion drummers. It might have been Dennis Chambers, right? So it's two hi-hats. And every time you play the hi-hat, you follow it with a kick drum. And then you break it up with the snare drum. So it's like any kind of soloing between kick drum, hi-hats, and the snare drum, right? Right? So I came up with this part with this tune. And it was arguably the hardest thing I've ever written or played. And now they want to do that too. And so I was at my studio the other day and I was like, okay, well, what was this? I was like, I remember this. And I'm playing it and I played the album and I was like, I can't play that fast anymore. Like, I can't do it. And I wrote them a text. I was like, are you guys cool if it's a little slower?
Oh man, that's funny. Obviously you probably used a double bass drum setup and not a double bass pedal.
Oh, actually, I was always a double pedal person. I never went with double kick drums. Yeah, it was one of the things I used to get criticized for the first early days of playing in my metal band, but people got into it after a while. They're like, oh, this is the one and only thrash metal drummer that plays with the double pedal. So I'd always play with the double pedal. And because I still wanted to play like, Vinnie Colaiuta and Dave Weckl, which were doing double pedal, but they had a single kick.
Which I guess it's true that Vinnie Colaiuta played on a lot, I think, or most of the Megadeth records. Yeah,
I remember trying to cross-reference that, and it does not surprise me at all. I mean, that guy's a ridiculous, like, different level type of player. I mean, it's amazing that he can play on a record like that and make it sound just like them, just like any other state-of-the-art metal drummer, like a Josh Freese or you name it. I mean, he just is. Then he goes totally incredible. I mean,
then he plays with Herbie Hancock, and I'm like, damn, this dude. And then you see him playing with Shaka Khan. It's like he's laying it down, and then Frank Zappa. I'm like, oh my god, he's easily top like 5 drummers, most versatile drummers ever, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I'm scratching my head. I don't know of another player in the world that is as versatile as him. Maybe the cat from, what was that dude's name that did the Snarky Puppy records? What is his name? Killer drummer.
It was Sput, I think it's. I can't remember their names. There's like a couple of them.
Yeah, it's. Any rate, I've seen him do a few different things, and he's done this thing on YouTube where he hears a song one time.
Yes, that guy. Yeah, back. I forgot his name.
Yeah, that dude.
And he's great. He did Enter Sandman.
That's exactly it. I was just thinking of that exact one. Someone sent it to me, and I was like, "Oh, this shouldn't be that hard. I know that tune. I mean, my God, I love that Black record, right?" So they're playing it, and he's like, I have never heard this song.
I saw him say that. I was like, I can't believe you never heard that song before.
I know. But when he played it back, man, that guy played it with some unbelievable conviction.
Yes.
And I mean, like, in the pocket, mellow drummer, just badass. Yeah. I was like, I don't think I could do that.
It's like, Matt, here's a Snarky Puppy song. I want you to hear it once.
About it. Yeah, I know.
I'd be like, no, I'm out. And I love that stuff too, man. I love their stuff.
I know, me too.
But anyway, we're getting off topic here. I want to ask you a question as far as, Broadway. What advice would you give someone who's interested in playing Broadway shows? If a drummer says, I want to play Broadway musicals, what do I need to do, Matt?
Yeah, I would, a lot of things have changed in the last decade, how you approach music, how you break into a music scene. And so I don't want to feel like I'm outdated or old school, but I still think that music, unlike the internet, is something that takes a lot of time and a lot of hours, and a lot of conviction and a lot of love to make wherever you want to go, make it happen for you. And so with that said, I think being a Broadway drummer where you want to sub, you want to eventually own your own chair, and you want to be able to make a career out of it, hopefully a long one. Start at the community level, start at the regional level, even go play high school shows, get a lot of experience, learn all the different styles that are involved in the Broadway show, and play every single gig you possibly can. Join bands that are going to give you the vast amount of playing experience. And because on a Broadway show, if there's a specific aspect of your playing that's weak or not well developed, it's really going to come out on the show. You know what I mean? And I think starting at a point where you can develop an experience. Like going into a Broadway drummer, to me, is just like joining a band. If you want to be a rock and roll drummer, you're going to join bands, and you're going to start with bands. You're going to keep playing with bands, and hopefully one day that you're going to end up touring the world on arenas and making a bunch of money and making a bunch of records. But you're going to start at the very bottom level with a garage band. Same thing with a Broadway show. You should start playing in very simple shows that give you the playing experience and the amount of you're just playing experience to develop yourself to get ready to go and play on a Broadway show. Because a Broadway show is the professional level where sometimes people break right in and they have no background experience. Maybe they just came from school, but they're going to, I mean, it might be just a specific show, but if you really want to make a career out of it and work all the different types of shows that there are, because there's a ton, rock and roll shows, R&B, Latin, traditional, classical, you name it. If you want to be able to work that vast variety of shows and make a career out of it, I think you need to start with just developing the repertoire, essentially like getting ready to play in the symphony orchestra. You learn all the repertoire to get ready to play. You learn all the Broadway type of repertoire to get ready to play and do shows and try to get yourself called on stuff to get you prepared and ready to go. And off Broadway shows and off Broadway shows. The more experience you get, the easier it's going to be. And the more serious people are going to take you when you start breaking into the Broadway scene,
What are some things that a drummer in a Broadway show should never do?
I mean, as a sub or as a regular? Because I think there's two different worlds.
All right, yeah, there are. Okay, let's start with by being a sub. What is something that a drummer that is subbing on a Broadway show, what are the things that they should never do?
When you walk in to play the show that's exactly like the regular drummer. What you should never do is walk in there and play the show like you're trying to impress the music director and you do your own thing, like some fancy fill, some fancy whatever, because all it's going to do is piss off everybody. Playing wise, I think that's probably the fundamentals of being a sub, is that your job is to sound exactly like the regular player. And that's how you get noticed and break in. But if you go in there and you are eager to show off your own skills and like, this is who I am, it never works out. So that's a never do. Never go in there and piss off the people. Don't, be easy to get along with and be accommodating to the point where you're just, people look forward to talking to you and hanging out with you. If you're somebody that rubs people the wrong way and you're abrasive on a Broadway show, the music director may like you a lot, but the regular player is probably going to hear from other people that they were difficult to be around, and then they won't call you back.
So the same question, but someone who has the drum chair. I guess, maybe it's different because you've had the drum chair for so long. Maybe.
Right.
Do you have any advice of things that you feel that you should never do yourself?
Yeah, you shouldn't. Broadway's a big business. The companies and the producers and the shows, they make a lot of money. So it's really not about you. It's about being a member of the orchestra and a part of the product. And so what you shouldn't do is try to make it about you. Tell people that you don't actually want to be there. This is beneath you. This is whatever that is. Being there and a part of a Broadway show is being a part of being a part of a family. You could imagine if you're a member of a family that no one wants to be around, that's just going to make your life miserable. Imagine if you're on a show for 20 years, 10 years, 15 years, and no one gets along with you. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it could be just a nightmare, but I think getting along in personalities when you're sitting on a show, because you've already been hired for your playing ability. So how you connect and your chemistry with the other players is critical. So what not to do is be a jerk.
All right. On the flip side, as a sub drummer on Broadway, what should you always do?
I've heard this from music directors. I heard it when I was a sub, and I've heard it while I'm a regular player, that when you are a sub, you should come in and check in with the music director early enough and the contractor to let those two people know on a professional level that you're there early, that you care, and that this is important to you. If they know those three things, just because you checked in, you say, hey, I'm here, I want to let you know. They may not, they barely acknowledge you, like, oh, thank you for letting me know. But trust me, it sits. I've had a music director tell me, like, such and such showed up only a few minutes before the show started. And I didn't appreciate that. That person had been there many, many times. It was one time. And for some reason, that particular sub didn't check in with the music director. So it does matter. And with that said, when a music director knows that you're there and that you care and that you're studious, when they come up to the podium and they start getting ready to start the show, they're going to feel confident that you're there. So that's something you should always do is 90%, 95% of that gig that night is you being there on time. No matter what, being late is not an option. So be there plenty early. Let people know, music director, the contractor, that you're there, and everything will be good. That's probably the best advice I have, And, playing is a given. You got to kick ass, but you know what I mean.
So I see that you have a T-shirt, which is a diagram of the Ludwig Speed King.
Yeah.
Bass drum pedal, one of the greatest bass drum pedals to come out. A lot of people used it back in the 60s and 70s, and I had one for a long time. But I'm curious
me too.
as to what kind of gear do you use right now on Wicked? Did you bring in your drum set, by the way?
I have my drum set over there. I didn't at first. There's the drums that I'm using are D'Amico drums made by a guy named Gene D'Amico. He's based out of Massachusetts, and it's a custom kit, like Keller shells and beautiful paint job, beautiful drums. I'm using like a 10, a 12, and a 15-inch floor tom. The snare drums are either D'Amico or I have a DW Lake Superior drum. Sometimes I swap out, but D'Amico drums, and there's like some Pearl hardware and a rack that belongs to the show. The cymbals are all Sabian that I use, and the sticks are all Vader percussion sticks. The heads are Evans, and that's about it. So cymbal sticks, heads, and drums are all either D'Amico, Evans, Vader, Sabian, and hardware's like Pearl.
Do you have endorsements with all of these companies?
Not all of them. I have Sabian, D'Amico, Vader. Those are the three main ones.
Did you get these endorsements by working on the show, or was it before? How did it all work out?
D'Amico, I used to have a Zildjian endorsement when I was with Defiance, my band. And D'Amico I picked up while I was with my band. So D'Amico and Zildjian I had for a while. Zildjian dropped me eventually. That just kind of fell off the roster. And then I picked up Vader percussion and Sabian when I got Wicked.
Were they looking for you, or did you look for them? How did the relationship come to be?
I went looking for them. I was now playing full time, and you end up spending a lot of money if you're buying sticks, head cymbals at retail. So I was not necessarily looking for someone who's going to promote me as like the Wicked drummer and, do seminars and, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to do TV cameras and lots of spots. I knew that I wasn't that kind of drummer for them. What I wanted was support for a professional musician. And, I will support you, you'll support me. And what I need is just a break in the cost, because I know that at this stage of the game, they were not giving free stuff away, or unless you were like the drummer for the Foo Fighters, you know what I mean? So Sabian cymbals, because cymbals crack and they break and they become very specific. And I really wanted access to the best product for that particular show. And I was willing to pay for them, but I couldn't pay $600 for a crash cymbal because I loved, an artisan series or something. So I was introduced to Andy Zildjian that runs Sabian, and I've subsequently become, good friends with him and have hung out with him a bunch of times. And he was very helpful in helping me choose cymbals and get set up at Wicked. He was looking to expand Sabian's market share in New York City for endorsees for the Broadway scene. I don't think any of us get stuff free. I mean, maybe some of us do, but I don't. So I always pay at cost for my cymbals and replacements. But Andy had come by the show and had listened and was like, you should choose this, you should choose that. And I was like, I'm looking for this sound. He knew exactly what it was. I mean, that was like a great relationship that I established, because he's hands-on with every single cymbal design at Sabian that comes out. And, each time a new product comes out, I was like, so what do you think of this? And he was like, it's this, it's got this kind of color. It's got this kind of, crash and the way the cymbal spreads. And I'm like, you think it would work for this and that? And he's like, I'm not so sure for this one. But, he had turned me on to this hand-hammered raw bell dry ride that I use at the show from Sabian for my ride cymbal. And when I put that thing up, it had enough stick to it that everybody, because I'm behind a booth and an elevator shaft, and people across the other side of the pit could hear the stick and feel it. And then when I'd lay into the bell, they could really hear it. And it worked because I'm from the rock and roll world, which is a bottom up type of player, kick, snare, but a lot of the people on the other side of the pit are jazz players, which is kind of the cymbal top down type of tech. You know what I'm saying? So when I was trying to figure out how can they hear the time on the hi-hat and on the ride cymbal, which is what they're listening to, because they're not used to hearing like boom, ga, ooh, ga. I mean, they hear it, but they're listening to dang, dang, bang, dang, go back at the and gang. That's more of what they're putting their thing on. And a few of these cymbals from Sabian were just like cutting through all of that. And it was like working perfectly. And Andy knew exactly what would cut through for them to be able to hear all that. It was really pretty cool.
It's very interesting. And I need to probably rethink that. There's some stuff that I do in the show that, especially when there's just the a situation where I'm playing for a long period of time, or I'm playing something that's just me playing and I'm supporting the dancers. I gotta rethink some of the sounds that I'm using. But I mean, I like what I'm using now, but it's always good to be exposed to new sounds and different series from different cymbal manufacturers. So,
oh, definitely. I mean, a huge proponent of Sabian cymbals, somebody that it's always trying out different stuff in their catalog, is Larry Lely, and he's got a huge wealth of knowledge on like what works here and what works there.
Outside of Defiance, is there anything that you're working on at the moment, musically?
Oh, musically. Yeah, there's a guy that when I first moved to the city, he ended up marrying this woman, the woman I was roommates with. But he ended up becoming one of the Phantom understudies at the show Phantom in the City. And so he started his own show, and it's called Jeremy Stoll's No More Talk of Darkness. And the band is like the Unreachable Stars band. It's basically a Broadway review type of show that he does. And we've toured China 2 times, and we just went and played a week out in Wichita at a major theater company at an outdoor amphitheater. And we're going to play at Birdland coming up in September, one of the last weekends or something like that. And that's a lot of fun. There's some really good players on that gig. It's just 3 musicians, and then it's him and the other singers. And then we do play to some backing tracks because, filling out an entire orchestra of that size is quite expensive when you're at the starting phases of it, but it's really a lot of fun. There's that. I'm doing my Defiance thing again. And
so are you playing in New York? Is Defiance playing in New York? Because I will be in the mosh pit.
I don't know if they are. We might end up out here in New York, which would be killer, man. I would have all the Broadway goons that I know come and check out that one. The other thing that I'm doing right now is a guy that I've been working with on and off for about a decade. It's bar band stuff. He's a great guitar player, but he's also a stagehand. His name's Tommy Grosso, and he does his own band. And I've been playing down on the Jersey Shore all summer long. I have a gig with him next Wednesday out in Jersey. It's an 80s band kind of thing. And that's been a lot of fun. I was doing some online teaching for lessons and a few recordings up until January. And then my wife and I, she is originally from Bangkok, we were able to get out of the country and go visit her family for a while. So because she had been laid off for the pandemic as well as I had been laid off. So we had a bunch of time, and I wanted to get out of here for 10 months of this thing. I was like, I'm done. So we went out there, and I played a lot out there. I played in a lot of bars, and I taught 2 seminars at a university while I was out there, which is something that really intrigued me. I didn't know how I was going to like teaching on a seminar level, and I actually really like it. It was a lot of fun. I taught them, but I played some excerpts from Wicked, similar to the conversation that we're having here, about being a freelance drummer, a well-versed drummer, a drummer that's going to work in theater, that works at bars and plays at, high-level gigs or studio sessions or whatever. So that's what I've been up to for like this year.
If people want to find you online, where can they find you?
At mattvanderend.com. That's my website.
And how do you spell your last name for those who don't know?
Well, it's Matt, M-A-2-T's, M-A-T-T, Vanderende, VANDERENDE.com. And I have all my updates. I put up like where I'm playing or what's coming up next or what have you. So it'll be up there, including this interview when it's done.
I think it was like 1992. Before I moved to New York City, another kind of metal thing that we can connect on. I went to see this band called 24/7 Spies at the 930 Club in D.C.
Oh man, I played that club. Okay, go ahead.
It was such a great club.
Yeah.
I just remember saying, I was young, and I thought I'd try it. They had a mosh pit. I don't know if you've ever been in a mosh pit before. You probably started
not too many
one.
times.
But I went in. I was like, okay, I'm going in. I went in. They're throwing fists and elbows. And man, I got elbowed in my chest. I was like, time out. That was the last time I went. I saw Fishbone last summer at, I guess, Sony Music Hall, right across the street from Ain't Too Proud. And I got in the front row, and I forgot where I was. I was so captivated with them, and it's like fucking Fishbone. And then I realized,
right, exactly.
I was in the front, and I was pinned against the stage. I'm like, oh shit! I have flashbacks of 1992. I was like, okay, I'm going in the back. I'm an old man now. I'm not trying to get my brittle bones smashed.
Oh my God!
But did you ever get into a mosh pit?
Yeah, I tried. So there's so much energy and anger in a mosh pit. Me, as a skinny white kid, 19, 20 years old, I remember kind of getting into this thing and going around it and getting hit 3 or 4 times between like the chin and the shoulder. And I just was like, I can't handle it. I mean, the people there are like thugs, straight up street fighting thugs. It's like,
yeah, and they're all big, and they're like, yeah.
Oh my God, they're all big and buffed and tatted out, and skinheads or whatever. And I mean, I tried it a couple times, but you got to be a certain kind of person to handle that. We had a manager that was handling the early stuff for Defiance. It was a friend of ours. He was completely crazy. His name was Ace. So he would literally run up on the stage and do a stage dive down into the mosh pit. And then he would you'd see the hands and the fists thrown along, and there was always blood down in those pits. Someone getting a tooth knocked out, a nose broken, or something, And at the 930 Club in Washington D.C., man, that place was. We played there a couple times with Defiance on tour, and that place would just explode, like boom, there's a pit everywhere.
I'm sure you played CBGBs back in the day.
Oh no, we didn't play CBGBs. That we didn't play that club when we came through New York. We played some other place. I can't remember the name of it. It was over on the west side of town. It wasn't on the east side. I wish I had played CBGBs. The equivalent of CBGBs out in the Bay Area in Berkeley was a place called Blondie's, and or Ruthie's Inn. I'm sorry, Blondie's was in Detroit. Ruthie's Inn was the same kind of thing as CBGBs, and same kind of like really whacked out, down in the gutter rock club that was like a punk club that was kind of the birth of the Berkeley punk scene. And like Black Flag would play there, Metallica played there.
There was another place that I went to when Ain't Too Proud was out in Berkeley in 2017. There was a club in Berkeley that was
Gilman Street?
Yes, that was it.
Yeah.
I walked in, I was like, oh shit, this is like some legendary place. Did you ever play there?
That's where.
That's not really. That wasn't your.
I played there when it was before it was the Green Day, like legendary birth of Green Day and those other bands. I played there with a funk band one night. We also used to play a place called the Berkeley Square which was another club like that had a lot of different bands. But Gilman Street was legendary for that scene. I think Defiance played there. I can't completely remember. When Defiance was playing a lot, we played the Stone in San Francisco, which is no longer around. And we played Ruthie's Inn, which is in Berkeley, which is no longer around.
Played the Whiskey in LA.
We did play the Whiskey. We played Gazzari's and the Whiskey in LA.
Gazzari's.
Yeah,
I don't think I've ever been to
right?
either club. I wish I had gone. I guess the Whiskey is still around. I hope it's still open.
I think it is. I mean, a lot of these clubs are tragically closing across the United States everywhere. You know, there's only a few of them left, and it's sad. You know, CBGB's is gone, Blondie's is gone, Ruthie's is gone, the Stone is gone. A couple of those clubs in LA are gone, and these are the birthplaces of the early. I mean, Elton John played the Whiskey A Go-Go and Gazzari's in these places. You know, in Los Angeles, and then the Stone was where Metallica got their start. You know, CBGB's is with the birth of all of New York punk as we know it is from that spot. And these places are all gone. You know, it's a drag. Not that they need to last forever, but for musicians, it's like the holy grail, these kinds of clubs, and they're just closing them left and right. You know,
I'm glad the Bitter End is still around. Yeah,
exactly. That is still around.
It sounds good in there and seems like they're good people, but
yeah.
Anyway.
Man, thank you for having me. It was like, this is a lot of fun.
Once again, thank you, Matt Vander Ende. I'm going to say it one more time. Thank you for joining me on the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast.
Of course. Anytime, man. Anytime.
Thank you for joining the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast. If you like what you hear on the show, subscribe to the Broadway Drumming 101 newsletter at broadwaydrumming101.substack.com. That's Substack, substack.com. The Broadway Drumming 101 newsletter is your one-stop shop for everything you'll need to know about playing drums for Broadway musicals. When you subscribe to the newsletter, you'll learn about what it takes to be a successful pit musician with content delivered directly to your email inbox 2 to 3 times a week. As a paying subscriber, you'll receive behind-the-scenes access to the life of a musician who makes a living on Broadway. You'll also be able to read every post, not just those occasional free ones. You'll get access to all newsletter issues in the archives and have an ability to participate in subscriber-only comments and events. If you become a founding member for a gift of only $75, you'll receive discounted private drum lessons and a 25% discount on future promotional products. If you'd like to make a direct contribution to the production of this show, you can reach us at Venmo at Clayton-Craddock, Cash App at Syncopated, that's CINCOPATED, or PayPal at Clayton Craddock. Any amount of support will be appreciated. Thank you for listening.